Okay, so we're going to start the Chapter 1 lecture. I provide this overview slide. It gives you some of the, really the learning objectives for this chapter. And they do seem pretty general, but I think you'll find that these are the things that I've gone over in the lecture. Excuse me. And it helps you to know what it is I want you to know. So I edited these learning objectives myself, and it matches up to what's in the lecture. So I know students tend to skip a slide like this, but in fact, because I wrote it myself and I really edited it, it really gives you an idea of where I'm going. What is it that I want you to learn? What is it that I want you to know? And so starting with all the biology terminology that are in the lecture, if there's anything that you don't already know or you don't know very well, you can look those up either in your textbook or find a biological definition for any of the terminology. And then divided by section, the different things that I'm going after. And sometimes I add things in that aren't in the textbook particularly. Just going, like we're going to go over peer-reviewed journals and IMRAD and such. So some things I add in. And so if you watch the lecture and you understand everything that's in the lecture and that's what you're studying, you'll do well in my course. And then once you've studied and practiced, you will ultimately take the post-quiz, practice it over and over and over again to get the concepts into your head, and so that when you take the exam, for the most part, you know it. Anything that's really giving you trouble can go on that note card. You are allowed one 3x5 note card for the exam, but not your full set of notes. So what you're doing during lecture is capturing the things I'm saying alongside with the slide that it goes with. And that's why I say either download the PowerPoint, or I'm kind of a pen and paper kind of person. I would actually print it out. That's up to you. Take notes right there with the slide that it goes with. Capture what I'm saying, capture what I'm trying to explain, and then you have that to study from. Then take your post-quiz, take it many times, get a good grade on that. Then you'll be in good shape for the exam. Okay, so I have all these learning objectives, which could be really used directly as a review sheet. Explain what is meant by the unity and diversity of life. Describe the 3 domains of life, etc. Those things will make more sense once you have watched the lecture. You may want to watch the lecture more than once. Down here, I have skills for the entire course that we'll be working on. Learn how to ask better questions. So when you ask a question from a professor, and especially in an online class where you're going to have to take a little extra effort to ask questions, either by email or come to office hours, you want to be as specific as you can. For example, I understand this part, but here's where I get lost. Really try to pinpoint where your confusion is. And I think you'll get better answers from not just from me, but from any professor. Learn how to think like a professor when preparing for a test or quiz or exam. A good professor will look back at all the material that they presented and write the questions from that. If you have a bad professor, I don't know what to tell you. But for me, I look at what I presented and I write those things in the form of a question. And so you'll see when you take those the post quizzes that's what I'm doing. And you'll kind of be able to get in my brain a little and kind of think about how I'm going to ask things. And then throughout the course, learning how learning works. I wish that you could just listen to something once or see something once and it would just permanently go into your brain. But we all know that doesn't happen. So studying a little every day is better than trying to study right before the exam everything. So maybe pace yourself out more than you think you need to. And I bet that you'll realize that it really works better. So, all right. Here we go. Okay, so chapter 1, the first section is called The Diversity of Life is Overwhelming. Now, biology is the study of living things, the study of life. And there is a lot of diversity and variety in the living world. The diversity of life can be overwhelming when we think about what's on Earth right now. If you really think about what has ever lived and has gone extinct, then it's like even 10 times more than what we have now. But in any case, the diversity of life is overwhelming. However, all life shares common features, and we refer to that as unity. So there are certain things inside the cell, even certain molecules inside the cell, that are exactly the same or almost exactly the same for all living things, all cells. And so the unity is due to evolution. There was originally one event or maybe a couple events that created the first cell. So it may have been a couple cells. We don't really know. And then as those cells reproduced by cell division initially, then you had more and more of the same cells, but then mutation might change one cell and not the other one or the other ones. And so over time, as mutation happens within certain subsections of this growing population of cells, then life starts to diversify and eventually becomes different species, and then eventually becomes different types of organisms. But underlying that are still some things that are the same between all types of organisms. There are some things that are all the same. And then the diversity is due to these mutations that occur over long periods of time. We're talking billions of years with a B. And so what we see on Earth now is a lot of diversity, but there's underlying it a lot of some level of similarity in some of the most critical parts of the cell. And so the unity and the diversity is all part of this evolutionary process that has created it. Biological diversity is traditionally divided into 3 domains. So what scientists love to do is put things into categories. We like to describe and name things. You'll see this throughout the whole course. This is humans. We're describing and we're putting things into categories. We're trying to organize. So the main organization is called taxonomy. It's the naming and organizing of living organisms. And the 3 broadest categories in taxonomy are the domain bacteria, the domain archaea, and the domain eukarya. So those are the 3 down here at the bottom of the slide. The bacteria consist of unicellular organisms. That means each cell is the whole organism. The domain archaea, and that is how you pronounce it, also consists of unicellular organisms. The domain eukarya, eukarya, consists of some of the species in domain eukarya are unicellular, but some are multicellular. Multicellular means more than one cell makes a single organism. So humans are multicellular. We have about 20 trillion cells with a T in each organism. Now, it doesn't have to be 20 trillion. There are some multicellular organisms that only have 100 cells to make up the whole organism. So there's no rule about how many cells it is. It just has to be more than one. But in any case, bacteria and archaea only consists of unicellular organisms. Eukarya consists of unicellular organisms and also multicellular organisms of different types. So we have those 3 domains. This is just a picture from your textbook. The domain archaea, I circled it. These are each one of these little blobs in the picture. Let me get my mouse here. That's one cell. So there's probably, 100 cells easily in this picture, 100 organisms. But These organisms are what we call prokaryotes. You see this word prokaryotic right here. That means the cells, they have DNA, but they don't have the DNA contained in a structure that's called the nucleus. So they have DNA, but no nucleus. The bacteria are also prokaryotes. And you're not going to have to recognize a photo, so don't worry about that. But the domain bacteria are prokaryotes and also unicellular. But the bacteria and the archaea are very different. There was a guy who did some gene studies and found that what had originally been all one grouping, we used to call it Monera, in fact, is actually two very different groups of organisms. And the guy's name was Carl Woese, W-O-E-S-E. And by studying genes, gene sequences in these prokaryotes, he actually found that there's two distinct groups, very different from each other, based on the genes that they have. So he was the one who separated what was called Monera into these two domains, archaea and bacteria. Now, the other group is called domain eukarya. Eukaryotes are organisms that have a nucleus, DNA enclosed in a nucleus. We'll talk about what the nucleus is later. But so that grouping is called eukarya. And within eukarya, I put a big circle here because within eukarya, there are some of the organisms are unicellular, some are multicellular. In this image, the protists are unicellular, although this is probably a terrible thing to choose for a protist picture. They could have just selected amoeba. Amoeba is a great example. It's unicellular and it's a protist. Fungus, some fungi are unicellular, some are multicellular. These are mushrooms, so they're multicellular. Plants, kingdom Plantae, and animals, kingdom Animalia. So within the eukaryotes, these are not the only groups, but these are the main groups. So that's what we're showing you here. But these organisms are all eukaryotic in the domain eukarya. And then some of them are unicellular and some of them are multicellular. So what I've been using, the language I've been using here is part of the taxonomy, the categories. Domain, there's 3 domains on Earth: archaea, bacteria, eukarya. Yes, you have to know those 3 names. You have to know that all 3, you have to know for each one of them, you need to know whether it's unicellular or multicellular, or in the case of eukarya, some of both. And is it prokaryotic or eukaryotic? Is the DNA contained within a nucleus or not? So you can rewind the lecture to find that out. Then what you need to know are the category names in order that go after domain. So each domain is divided into several categories called kingdoms. Each kingdom is divided into many different phyla. Each phylum is divided into different classes. Each class is divided into many orders. Each order is divided into families. Each family is divided into genera, and each genus is divided into many species. So these are the categories going from broadest, domain is the biggest category, to smallest or most specific, because the word specific and the word species come from the same root. This SPEC is species and specific, refer to that same concept. The most specific is the species. And so every organism belongs to a domain, a kingdom, a phylum, a class, an order, a family, a genus, and a species. But the names of those categories is different for each type of organism. So just for fun, you don't have to memorize what's on the right. You do have to memorize what's on the left. But what's on the right are the names of the categories for human. Domain Eukarya, kingdom Animalia, phylum Chordata, class Mammalia, order Primate, family Hominidae, genus Homo, and species Sapien. So that's just an example. But you do need to know the names of the categories in order from broadest to most specific. And the way you might want to remember it is to use a little trick, a little learning trick, where we have a sentence and the first letter of each word in the sentence helps us to put together or put in order each of these category names. So the sentence is, did King Philip come over for good spaghetti? Did King Philip come over for good spaghetti? And if you remember that sentence, then it helps you to put these in the correct order from broadest to most specific. You do not need to know the particulars for any particular organism all the way down to species. I was just showing you an example there. Another sequence that we need to get into our head is called the hierarchy of biology, or the hierarchical organization of life. And what this is starting with an atom, you can see here, and I know there are things smaller than an atom, but in this class we're going to start with the atom. Starting with the atom being what we're going to consider the smallest particle of chemistry. We're going to talk about the atom in Chapter 2, and we're going to talk about molecules and bonding in Chapter 2. So just enough chemistry, and remember, we'll get to it, but it was definitely one of your preview sheet statements, is that all of life depends on the rules of chemistry and physics. So we start really with chemistry, atoms, and you could argue physics as well. But atoms join together with bonds to make molecules. Molecules get really large, lots and lots of atoms bonded together make what we call macromolecules. Lots of particular macromolecules organized in a certain arrangement make structures called organelles. Organelles are structures within one cell. And when you have all the structures together in a certain way, that makes a cell. And so as you go from one level to the next, from atom to molecule, from molecule to macromolecule, fundamentally what you're doing is creating larger and larger things based on the previous level. Many of what came before. So several atoms together make up a molecule. Lots of very large molecules or macromolecules. Lots of macromolecules come together in a certain way to make organelles. Organelles come together in a certain way to make cells. So it's these levels of structure. And we're going to start with atom, and in this course, we're really only going to go to cell. And then we'll talk about things cells do, what their functions are. So structure and function. However, you do need to know the rest of the hierarchy, the rest of the levels. Many cells of the same type working together and usually connected together make up a tissue. Several tissues of different types come together to make organs. Organs work together in an organ system. All the different organ systems make up one organism. And then population and species are pretty similar. A population is just a group of organisms of the same species living in one geographical area, whereas the species itself would consist of all the organisms in the world of that same type. A community would be multiple species, plants, animals of different types living in a certain area. And then the difference between community and ecosystem is that a community consists of all the living organisms in a particular area, whereas ecosystems consists of that same area, but then accounts for all the non-living components as well. So not just the living, but also the non-living. Non-living would be like rock, wind, water, sunlight. And then all of the ecosystems collectively in the world make up the biosphere. The biosphere is the Earth. We're not going to go beyond biosphere in this course. So we're not going to talk about life. Well, we can talk about it, but we're not going to study life on other planets. Okay, so the cell is the basic unit of life. That means that the cell is the smallest thing on this list that's considered alive. An organelle by itself is not considered alive. An atom is not considered alive. So when we say the basic unit of life, what we mean is the item that by itself can be considered alive. Now, the atom is the basic unit of chemistry, but cells are considered the building block, the basic unit of life. That's the first thing that's considered alive. So that's the language that we use there. For unicellular organisms, the cell is the organism. So unicellular organisms don't have tissues, organs, and organ systems because from right here, when you get to cell, it goes right to organism. Those are the same. For multicellular organisms, since the organism is composed of more than one cell, then you do have tissues, organs, and organ systems. Right? So you do need to know the entire hierarchy, and I put it in 3 columns just so it would all fit on one slide. But you go atom, molecule, macromolecule, organelle, cell, then to tissue, organ systems, organism, then to population, species, community, ecosystem, biosphere. If you want a little better definition for any one of these, you can look it up in your textbook or get a biological definition somewhere online, but just have a general sense of what they are. You're not going to have to write out any particular definition. Just have a general concept of what they are and which one is bigger. So atom is the smallest, and these get bigger as we go. So biosphere is the world, the Earth. Here's your picture from your textbook. They start with atoms here, hydrogen, nitrogen, oxygen, carbon. And keep in mind, you're zoomed really close in. You're looking at something really, really small in this diagram here on number 1. And then as you go across, as the structures get bigger and bigger, you're like zooming out. You're moving away so that you can see bigger and bigger items in the same view until you get all the way to biosphere, and then you're looking at the Earth from some kind of satellite in outer space. So there's a kind of this zoom out as you move across this slide. Okay, the properties of life. Every textbook I've ever used tries to make this list. We could have a long philosophical discussion about this, but we try to define what is life compared to something that is not alive, non-life. So if life is bios or biotic, then non-life would be abiotic. So abiotic with an A and then a biotic. So life versus non-life. Number 1, life consists of cells, and cells have organization. So when they say cellular organization, life has a cell-based organizational system. In other words, the cell is the main unit of life, and then inside the cell there's certain organization of the way the structures are, and then multiple cells are organized to make a multicellular organism. So anything around that could be considered cellular organization. So they're just saying that life has some kind of cell-based organization. It's very general. Number 2, energy flow. There has to be an exchange of not just energy, but also matter between an organism and its environment. So we call it energy flow, where you kind of picture the organism and the energy comes in from the environment, and then energy comes out of the organism back to the environment. So we'll be talking about energy flow. If energy is not flowing through, not coming in or coming out of an organism, then that could be one definition of death. When energy stops flowing through an organism. Homeostasis is the organism is trying to maintain a constant, some kind of constant environment. And then growth, development, and reproduction. All organisms grow, develop, and reproduce in some way. These are very general. They have to be very general because there's so much diversity of life that when you try to put single words to describe it, it's very hard to do because there's always an exception, right? There's always that one organism that doesn't do this or that. But all organisms grow in some way, develop, and reproduce. Or all life, and not all individual organisms, but life does. And then heredity, the passing of information from one generation to the next, which is kind of part of reproduction too. So, but heredity, the inheritance being passed from one organism to the next. So like I said, this is very general, and it's the author's attempt to define life. And you don't need to memorize this list. We will spend, though, most of our time in this class talking about the cell and the organization of the cell and about energy flow, believe it or not. These first two will take up most of our time in this course. And then if you go on to a 1407 course, you'll see some more of this. But again, these are very general. Don't memorize these. Okay. I'm going to take a break at this point, and you might want to take a break, or you can go on to the next lecture segment in the playlist, but I'm going to go ahead and take a break just to keep the lecture files reasonably small. Otherwise, they get very hard to upload. So I will see you in the next lecture segment.